his botanical and observations of wildlife in the Galapagos Islands during the voyage of the Beagle. He developed his theory of natural selection and the evolutionary theory. And so in 1859, Origin of the Species is published. And it is difficult for us today to even begin to understand the immense impact that the evolutionary theory had on Western thinking, because we live past it. We live in a society that has already experienced this deep impact, and none of us know what it was like beforehand. So it's hard for us to see just how incredibly major, I mean, you would call this a paradigm shift. The way that people thought was changed by the introduction of this theory. Obviously, it caught on very quickly. In fact, even in America, it caught on very quickly. Within 1 decade, there was only one leading scientist left in America who questioned Darwinian theory. Within 10 years, it's an incredibly fast transition of thinking. And the Darwinian theory, the concept of development from simple to complex by natural laws, was very quickly applied in many other areas. In fact, in all 3 other areas that we will look at, Darwinian evolutionary theory is very important. But the idea that things could change, and change without purpose, that all of history was not guided by God's omnipotent hand, the idea that man himself was not distinct from or special, was not distinct from the created order as being created in the image of God, was not special, but was in fact an animal, had revolutionary impact upon culture, thinking, education, science, everything. And the church as well had to deal with this issue. Now, I think most of us would be surprised by the fact that almost from the very beginning, there were large numbers of fairly conservative ministers and theologians who had no problem with the Darwinian theory and very quickly embraced it. But I'm sure you can imagine within most denominations, it was, if anyone took that position, there was very quickly those on the other side who took the other position, and many of the churches were greatly strained and stressed by the introduction of Darwinian evolutionary theory. Well, you can see what kind of impact this would have upon those who held to what would eventually be called the fundamentals of the faith. Obviously, people could take the Darwinian theory, just as they continue to do today, and say this is clear and unarguable evidence that the Bible is nothing more than an ancient collection of documents in which ancient men who did not have scientific knowledge attempted as best they could to explain life as they saw it. And they did the best they could, but they didn't do a whole lot much better than the Babylonians, the Egyptians, or anybody else who had their various myths and legends about creation. And of course, it could also be then said, the Bible clearly, excuse me, the Bible clearly presents 7 days of creation, but if the earth is actually billions, well back then millions and millions of years old, then this biblical teaching is clearly shown to be wrong, therefore the Bible is not inerrant, it is not inspired, etc., etc., etc. So there was this attack upon the faith in the form of Darwinian evolutionary theory that the church had to deal with, and we will see how this comes out more in a few moments. Second, Freudian psychology. Sigmund Freud lived from 1856 to 1939. In the late 1800s, his psychological theories began to catch on, again, interestingly enough, most swiftly in the United States. And Freud viewed mental activity, viewed the way that men think, the way that we act, as primarily driven by our sexual desires. And he, of course, tied in the relationships that we have with our mother and our father and all the rest of these things. But in reference to our perspective, our subject this evening, and that is fundamentalism, Freud obviously viewed religion as primarily an example of neurosis. Religion, he wrote in his book entitled The Future of an Illusion. The Future of an Illusion, which is how he described religion. The Christian faith is an illusion that eventually will be done away with. Why? Because for Freud, religious beliefs, for example, our desire to have the right relationship with God, was nothing more than a neuroses that arose out of problem relationships with our parents. Our desire to have a right relationship with God was really a desire to have a right relationship with our parents, but since we didn't have that, then we projected this onto a God figure. And our fear of the wrath of God was our fear of being punished. And all of these things were in reality just neurotic problems on the part of mankind that were common to many of us, which is what explained the commonality of religion amongst most societies. And so obviously, the more and more we studied ourselves, the more and more we got to learn of ourselves and know of ourselves, then the less need we would have of religion. And eventually, as mankind's knowledge continued to increase, that eventually this illusion of the need for religion would be done away with, and we would live in a religionless society. And of course, all of this concept masqueraded and frequently continues to masquerade under the banner of being scientific and scholarly and studied and so on and so forth. And since this theory took on so many believers so quickly in the United States, then it was quite easy for people to say, well, look, all the psychologists believe this, or all the educated people have seen that this is true and that we've made this great breakthrough here. And this, of course, shows us that you're going out and telling people they need Jesus is in reality just you're attempting to offer a little balm or salve that covers up what is actually a deeper psychological need. And really, the saviors of the world do not come from Palestine, but they wear the spectacles and they have psychologists on their door, and all you really need to do is go get psychotherapy and so on and so forth and get rid of your neuroses.